all these famous questions that people ask non-stop, we will address in this lecture, and we will supply scientific proof to every one of these questions as I mentioned. For instance, to create a table, you don't have to be a genius. You learn 1 or 2 hours and you understand the concept, how it works. To create a computer, you need perhaps years of learning and experience. The computer indicates how great is the creator of the computer as opposed to somebody who just made a table. In that case, when we review our world, the brilliance of the creation of this world, billions of stars and billions of galaxies, everything works in order. We look at the human being, which is the most sophisticated thing in nature. Just the brain of the human being, 10 trillion connections. Just for the argument's sake, if we take all the media companies in the world, all the telecommunication companies, all the satellites, all the wiring, every phone number that people has in the entire world, combine all of them together, it will not reach 1% of a brain of one individual. And this is one person only. Multiplied by 6.4 billion people that run around in this world, look at the previous generation, adds all of them together, we're talking about tens of billions of people. Each one of them with a brain and ligaments and muscles and liver and heart and many other things. Is it possible to think that this entire creation was made by itself, that some people trying to claim? The answer is absolutely not. Nobody would ever believe that even a watch, if a person has a watch and he claimed that the watch was made by a random explosion. He just walked on the street and there was an explosion and all the pieces came together and connected and now it's working for the last few hours. Nobody will take that person serious. On top of that, this is only a watch. Imagine trying to say that the brain of a person was created by some kind of development. It started with an explosion and slowly, pieces came together into place and now it's working, such a sophisticated computer. For those who didn't know, the brain is 80% water, 20% material. And the size of the brain is like the size of an orange, an average orange. And inside this brain, it's all connected in such a sophisticated way. To claim that something like this was able to be created by itself without a creator, it's insane. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody even believe what he claimed, for those people who claim that something like this can come out of just randomly. So the answer is, for sure there is a creator. The fact that we don't know him yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We see that everything that the human being needs in the world, he has plenty. For instance, oxygen. 1 minute without oxygen, the person died, or 2 or 3 minutes. But the point is that oxygen everybody needs. Everywhere in the world there was always oxygen, everywhere. We never have shortage of oxygen anywhere we go. Imagine if sometimes there was no oxygen, we have to walk with balloons on our back for emergency, that it will happen one day. How life would look. Then the second thing the person needs is water. You have water all over. 72% of the world is water. Then he needs food. We are not talking fancy food, just food to survive, bread. It's a few dollars a week, he can survive. Problem today that people have big eyes and they want unlimited pleasure and all kinds of bombastic meals. Well, we're not talking about this kind of desires. We're talking just food to survive. The more luxurious is the thing that a person is after, it's getting harder to get it. Why? It's not a necessity. Then one of the other questions we have to address today, is it life after death, as Judaism claims? We have to prove all this. So let's start. According to the Torah, when the Jews received the Torah 3,320 years ago in Mount Sinai, there was 49 days after the Exodus of Egypt. The Jews, the Hebrews I should say, were in Egypt for 210 years. Many generations of slavery. Finally, Moses was chosen by God to be the messenger, to be the leader, and take the Jews out of Egypt. As the famous classical story, the Jews exodus to Egypt through the ocean, and 49 days, which is exactly 7 weeks after, they stood around Mount Sinai, millions of people, and saw God and Moses having a conversation. The truth is that only the first 2 commandments from the 10 were given to Moses publicly. Everybody heard the first 2 commandments. I am the God that took you out of Egypt. That's the first commandment. The second commandment that everybody heard was, you should not have any other God but me. When God came to say the third commandment, as we read in the Torah, in the chapter of Jethro, the Jews were panicking. They just couldn't tolerate the event. And they say to Moses, please, we can't take this. We're very scared. Why don't you go up to the mountain, speak to this God, and everything he wants us to do, we are willing to do. No questions asked. Later we'll understand. First we do. After all the proofs we saw, we don't have that much to investigate. That was the idea. And Moses told them, don't be afraid. God is not here to harm you. He's only testing you to see, are you faithful enough to follow his laws? And that's how it started. That's basically the beginning, the foundation of Judaism. So we review in the Torah many of the things that affect our life every day, and it's all come down to one question. Is it possible to prove 100% scientifically that this Torah is divine, is really the Word of God, especially when we have a combination of written and oral Torah, 2 Torahs? One is the written, famous book that everybody knows all over the world. But the most important one is the oral laws. It's all the instructions that were given to Moses, and he passed it to the rabbis, and from generation to generation, all of that we have to address. Is it possible to prove 100% all this thing is divine? And that's what we're going to do now. The beginning point, if the Torah was given by God to us, as we know, we cannot find any mistakes there. If we're going to find a human error in the Torah, it would make everything else doubtable. Plenty of doubts. How do I know it's not the second mistake? How can I rely on a book that I already found one human error there? First, it's an indication that there is human interference there. And therefore, since human modified it, even if God gave it, human modified it, we cannot rely on it. Second, maybe it's 100% human. We're not going to dedicate our life and change our habits according to the orders of this book if we're going to have a doubt if this book is divine. It won't be the most clever thing to do. So we have to understand, is it possible to be proven? The answer is absolutely yes. As I'm continuing, today we have more than 80,000 religions and cults in the world, and it's growing tremendously. The first religion, in a right chronological order, is Judaism. It started 3,320 years ago. There were many cults before that, as the Torah described. People worship the sun, they worship the moon, all kinds of false belief. But the first public religion that started in front of millions of witnesses 3,320 years ago is the Torah. It's the foundation of Judaism. Then only 1,300 years later, about 2,000 years ago, Christianity started. Islam is less than 1,400 years old. So basically Christianity is only 1,300 years after Judaism started. And Islam is 2,000 years approximately after Judaism started. What about Buddhism? There was a person named Buddha 2,400 years ago. So that's still 900 years after Judaism started. What's the main difference between Judaism to all the other religions and cults that started after? One of the main differences is that every other religion and cult started with the story of one person. Nobody, none of these people who brought their book or brought their claims to the public were able to supply even one sufficient proof that the angel spoke to them or God really gave them a book or a mission. None of them. I'll give you an example. Obviously, we don't have time to waste on reviewing 80,000 religions and cults, so we'll speak about the three major one or the fourth major one. We'll start with Islam. In Islam, the story is that one day Muhammad came and claimed that Angel Gabriel gave him the Quran. And that's how it starts, and he nominated him to be another prophet after all the prophets. He never claimed that what took place until now was incorrect. The opposite. In the Quran, major parts of it speaking about God gave the land to the Jews, and Moses, which they call him Musa, but it's the same person, is the prophet of God. And if we have questions from the Quran, we have to review in the Torah. This is all appear in the Quran. And there's no doubt that the Torah was given to the Jews. He just claimed that he is another prophet of the list. The last one. Did he bring any witness that the angel gave him the Quran? The answer, absolutely not. Not even one witness. Later, when we review the Quran, we find many human errors. And I have all the sources with the surahs where it appears in the Quran. It can be reviewed. So, no witnesses. We're reviewing the book. We see human errors. Is it possible to think that God make such human errors? Let's give one or two examples of what does it mean, human errors. He takes some figures from Judaism, like Pharaoh. It's appeared in the Old Testament, in the Torah. And he's speaking about Pharaoh has a meeting with Haman. Haman was a minister in the time of Persia, in the king Ahasuerus. Haman was born approximately 900 to 1,000 years after the last Pharaoh died. There's 1,000 years difference between the pharaohs and the time of Haman in Persia. Pharaoh was in Egypt, Haman was in Persia. According to the Quran, Surah 40, 36, 37, it says that Pharaoh and Haman and their advisor were sinners. They copied that part right. And Pharaoh told his servants, I know you have no other God but me, which means he made himself God. They learned it also from the Torah. And as we continue, it says that I want you to build me a tower that I can go all the way up, etc., etc. But the point here that Pharaoh and Haman could never see each other. The person who wrote that book made a mistake in the right chronological order of the generations, and he thought that Haman and Pharaoh lived at the same time, and he made up an appointment or a meeting between them, which could never take place. As we continue, another example, we know that in history Moses and Aaron were brothers, and they had one sister, her name was Miriam. And also in history there was another famous Miriam, Maria, Mary, depend what nationality you come from. And this Mary was the mother of Jesus. He's Mary, the mother of JC, which lived approximately 2,000 years ago. In the Quran, in Surah 28, verse 7 to 9, it says, it's speaking about the wife of Pharaoh raising Moses. Now we all know, since the Muslims admit that the Jews received the Torah, in our Torah, which was 2,000 years before, it says that the daughter of Pharaoh, her name was Batya, she's the one who found Moses in the Niles, and she took him out and raised him. Not the wife of Pharaoh, the daughter. They made a mistake. They wrote that she was the wife of Pharaoh. Critical mistake, human error. And she says to the people after she found the baby, don't kill him. Maybe we will have a need for him. He will come for us. And they give all kinds of examples. But the main thing here is that he could never be the wife of Pharaoh because it was the daughter of Pharaoh, and he admitted that the Torah was given to the Jews in public. Another mistake, in Surah 19, 27, 28, it says that Virgin Mary, she is the mother of Jesus, according to Christianity, the New Testament. They speak about her in the Quran. And all of a sudden we find out that this Mary, Miriam in Hebrew, she is the same Mary or Miriam that lived 1300 years prior to that. Which Miriam? They claim that it's the same Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, which lived 1300 years before. They mix between two different women, that their name is Miriam, and they made them into one person. And they claim now that Mary or Miriam, she brought the baby in her hand to the people of their town, and they say, "Oh, Mary, Maria, what did you bring here? You are the sister of Aaron. Your father wasn't a bad man, and your mother was not a prostitute," which means how you became pregnant if you're not married. So they made the mother of JC the sister of Moses. Such critical mistake that even kids in first grade is unlikely to make. And right after that, Surah 66:12, it says, Maria, the daughter of Amram. Amram is the father of Moses and Aaron. So obviously, they mix between those two individuals. And obviously, God cannot make such foolish mistakes. Many other examples, but of course this is not the subject of this lecture. I just use it as an example for us to understand how do we define human errors in a book that claim to be the work of God. As we continue, I would like to speak a little bit about the New Testament, Christianity. This was written approximately 2,000 years ago. The Christians admit that the Jews received the Torah in Mount Sinai. They just call the Jewish Torah the Old Testament. And they claim that God gave part B, which means where the prophets ended, comes now the story of Mary and Joseph that get engaged. And then he goes out of town and he comes back and he sees his fiancée is pregnant. And what's going on, he asks. And she said, God came to me and made me pregnant. This boy will be something special. This is how it starts. And when we review how the New Testament begins with this story, we find something very, very critical. First, the book describes more than 30 generations between King David to Joseph the carpenter. What's the point? The point is to link Joseph the carpenter to the family of King David. Why? Because since they admit that the Torah is the work of God, in the Torah it says that the Messiah must be a descendant of the family of King David. Has to be a direct connection. That's why they're trying to prove that Joseph, the husband of Mary, he is a grandson of King David. So far everything is clear. Just when they finish describing all the generations, they write that Joseph has nothing to do with the baby. He went away, and when he came back, she was pregnant, and she claimed that God made her pregnant. So the question is, who is the mother of JC? The answer is Mary. Everybody saw. No doubt about that. Who is the father? The answer that Christian will say is God. The question we ask is, God is a grandson of King David? King David is the grandfather of God? Obviously not.